Welcome into another edition of Huber and Friends. I'm Jeremy Huber, and a lot of these have kind of been catch up sessions with folks that I haven't talked to in a few years. This one, a little bit like the old high school reunion before everybody had Facebook, and catching up with somebody I really haven't talked to in about 20 years, but she's still as great as ever. The host of Maggie and Perloff on Infinity Sports Network. It's Maggie Gray. Maggie, so good to talk to you and see your face again.
Jeremy, you haven't aged today. And unfortunately, I have, but you look fantastic, stunning. You would be rocking the high school reunion, but you'd be the prom king all over again.
Now, I think the last time we saw each other, at least at Westwood One, I had hair back then. So I definitely have lost that. But as people tell me, I got a good look without it. So I'm doing okay there. I let the cat out of the bag. Normally, we start these with how did we meet? We met at Westwood One. So I thought a different way to kind of get into those old days, a couple reminiscences from me about you. I remember you were there before I was, even though, like, I think you're about 4 years younger than me. You were a student at GW when you were working at Westwood One. And I remember you training me a little bit there. And one thing I always remember about you, Maggie, was at some point we were talking and you showed off this brand new pair of Jordans you had. I believe they were blue and light blue, kind of North Carolina colors. Are you still big into Jordans?
Well, I can't believe you remember that. Those were like my prized possessions for a while because they were this limited edition Rasheed Wallace Carolina blue Jordans. And I don't know if this was like the early days of eBay, but it may have been. I sent away to like some country I can't even pronounce to try to get those shoes. And I thought I'm getting scammed here probably, but I sent them my money anyway. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, the shoes showed up. And I think, Jeremy, that I wore those shoes until they literally disintegrated just into powder. I loved them. And it was the Rasheed Wallace like fadeaway on one foot, if you're watching this on video. And I thought they were so cool. They were like patent leather. Oh, you're making me nostalgic for them. I actually want to look up and see if I can get another pair. But no, I never really stuck with the Jordans. That's a very expensive habit. And I let that one go.
Yeah, it's one of those things I see all the time, and a lot of the pictures you have of all the different summits and things you host, and you can rock a good pair of designer shoes. We got to give you credit for that. But I'm thinking, wonder if Maggie still is big into the Jordans back then. Obviously, that was huge for you. The other thing that was big, and I remember this. This is one of those things where I was from a small town. I was the sports guy in my town, right? No one could challenge me, right? And I remember walking in, and obviously no girls could challenge me. And I remember meeting you and I go, okay, yeah, this is the first girl that I'm pretty sure can wipe the floor with me when it comes to sports knowledge. I actually hired you to come out and do halftime scores on high school football games that I was doing back then. Now, I didn't know at the time, but you had done a little bit of that, I believe, back in high school when you were coming up in Binghamton. Do you remember making that drive out from the middle of DC out to the wilds of Loudoun County?
I mean, every college student on a Friday night wants to drive to the suburbs to talk about high school sports. I loved that job. I know I didn't stay there for very long, Jeremy, but it was so cool. I remember like researching and trying to be, the one thing about covering high school sports and, so high school sports has played a huge role in my career. And some of the biggest breaks that I've gotten and been lucky enough to get in this industry all started with covering high school sports. So I know the first rule of high school sports, you cannot mispronounce a city, the high school's name, any of the players, because you're talking to the folks who are living there and this is very important to them. And it was important to me too. So I was just hoping I didn't make a mistake on how I'm pronouncing something and just showing, I didn't want to reveal that I'm not from that area and be like outed as a complete fraud. So I hope that I got everything right, but that was super fun. And again, high school, I recommend it to anyone who wants to get into broadcasting. Covering high school is the best because, first of all, you're not getting handed like a stat packet like you are at an NBA or an NFL game. Like, hey, here's every info nugget you would ever want. You got to dig for some of that information. You got to talk to people, and you're extremely accountable. Like, there have been times when I've said things about professional athletes or criticized them or had opinions and it's gotten back to them. And obviously I've had to deal with it. But you have to really be on your P's and Q's if you are going to, I'm not saying be negative or attack or anything, but if you are covering a high school, you're going to run into those people again. You are going to see them again. And it taught me a lot about accountability. It taught me a lot about just the mechanics of broadcasting. You know, I was doing sideline reporting for high school sports in New York City, was like one of my huge breaks. And we were on the same channel as the Knicks and Rangers. I have the same camera guy as the Knicks and Rangers. It's the same equipment. It's all the same. We just were covering high school. It was the best training ground I could have ever had. I loved it, and I learned so much.
Maggie, let's jump back to your early days. You grew up around the Binghamton area. Where did that love, that deep, passionate love of sports come from you?
I think probably my family. My grandmother was a really huge baseball fan, so she used to take me to minor league baseball games in my town. They're called the Rumble Ponies now. Thank you for that photo. Yeah, me at a young age wearing the headphones. Um, and I knew at a pretty young age that I wasn't going to be playing sports professionally. I think that's a realization a lot of us come to. But I just loved it, and I love talking about it. And I've heard other people say this about broadcasting, and it's true. When you're watching a game and you'd rather be the person in the booth than the person who's actually out throwing the touchdown or catching it, that's when you know you've got this love. And I loved like the storylines and the mechanics of it, and like, you know, the like NBA draft lottery. Like I was really into these like smaller parts, and I just wanted to make myself as smart about sports as possible. A photo there of me and my brother, my older brother. And I became like an umpire, a baseball and softball umpire. I just wanted to know as much as I could. And it just, the broadcasting bug, you know, hit me when I was an intern for the local hockey team when I was in high school. But as far as just growing up and loving sports, I love the Buffalo Bills. You can see behind me, we were in a Mets minor league town. So getting to see some of the Mets who are like rehabbing or getting called up to the majors was so cool. And minor league hockey too for the Binghamton Rangers. It was just a blast.
Tell me about that first, I believe your first job in sports was doing stats for a minor league hockey team in your
Yep.
hometown.
Yep. Poorly, rather poorly. I'm not a great statistician. Math, not my strong suit, but I was good enough to do that. And I went to go get an internship at the minor league hockey team, and they said really only college kids get them, which I totally understand. But they said the play-by-play broadcaster needs someone to help him out. And so I would go to the home games. I was a senior in high school. I would go to the home games. I'd keep stats for him. I would like lug these TV sets all around to like record the games and stuff. And the last game of the season before I went to college, he let me come on the air and do an out-of-town scoreboard. And I just thought this was the most thrilling thing in the world. Like you would have thought I was doing, you know, halftime of Monday Night Football. So it was just great. And I went to GW, as you said, George Washington in DC. And I the first day I got on campus, I went straight to the college radio station and said, what can I do?
Maggie, obviously you're a New York gal, so there's so many good spots between New York City, Syracuse up there, different spots where you can kind of do your craft in college. Why'd you pick GW in DC?
So my mom went to Syracuse, and honestly, if I was doing this all over again, maybe I should have gone to Syracuse. It was close to Binghamton. My mom went there. I grew up going to games at the Carrier Dome. And Syracuse is like the pro team in upstate New York because the Bills are great, but they're pretty far away from Binghamton. And it was just a little too close to home. You know, I wanted to go to a big city. I was not ready for New York. I thought DC was kind of like a nice meet in the middle. And growing up in a small town is fantastic. It was one of the great experiences of my life, and everyone knowing you and knowing my parents and everyone kind of like in your business a little bit, and all that is fun. But I really wanted to know what life was like in a bigger city. And GW, as you know, it's like there's no campus. It's like really just right in the city blocks as your college campus. Um that really appealed to me. And so the first media day for men's and women's basketball, I went and I got a chance to meet Larry Michael, who was working at Westwood One at the time, and just went up to him as a freshman and just said, "Can I be your intern?" And I actually had 3 different color hair at the time because of a tragic accident that had happened with some hair dye, and I looked completely ridiculous. And he said, "Sure, you're about to go on Christmas break or whatever, or maybe it was a fall break, must have been. Come
Mhm.
see me when you come back." And I went right away, and that started a relationship with Westwood that still exists to this day. And those guys have been so great to me.
I tell you what, a quick interlude. We won't talk about you, but I've got a similar story. I
Yeah.
was working for Wage Radio, same place that you came and did scores for, and I remember Joe Gibbs came back, and I told my guy I did play by play with on the high school football. I said, "Look," he said, "Do you want to meet anybody?" Because he used to go out to the park, and I said, "You know what? I just want to go say hi to Larry because I had run the board for GW games. We were their flagship station, which made no sense because we're 40 miles away." And I walk up to him and say, "Hey, Larry, I'm Jeremy. Nice to meet you." Putting a name with a face. He goes, and I said, something. He said, "Do you need work?" And I was like, "I guess if you got some." He goes, "All right, well, call me after the Super Bowl. I'm going to be at the Super Bowl." And I called him and he said, "Hey, do you want to come be part time?" And I said, "Sure." And that kind of started me down my path. So it's amazing how those kind of weirdly similar stories can come about. But as I think you've mentioned a lot in your days, sometimes it's just getting up to people at the right time and kind of just being there. And sometimes good things happen, right?
I think that's a part of this that it shouldn't be underrated, is just sort of figuring out who's in charge and asking them if they need anything. And so many good things in my life have come just by that. I got another big break in that kind of way. I mentioned high school sports. I was covering high school sports in Staten Island, New York, where I never even thought I would go to Staten Island, let alone work there. And I saw that MSG Network did a high school game of the week, and I was, like, "Oh, I could do this. I know the high school game. I've kind of been around the high school sports now for a little bit." So I made a demo. And I knew that the people who produced this high school game of the week were going to be at this basketball tournament in New Jersey. So I just had my demo tape and I just hung around the production truck. I mean, they didn't know me, and I waited until I saw the right guy, and I went up to him and I said, "You don't know me, but I could work for you and I could do a great job for you. I cover high school sports, and here's my demo." And he said, "Call me on Monday." And I did, and he goes, "Do you know the rules of lacrosse?" And I said, "Yes, I'm from upstate New York. It's a religion up there. I definitely know lacrosse." He said, "We're starting a new high school lacrosse game of the week, and we need a sideline reporter." And a couple more things, and I got the job. And then the guy who was doing football and basketball moved on to something else. And then I got his job. And all of a sudden I'm covering Kyrie Irving, and we're covering Don Bosco High School and Bergen Catholic and all these big time schools where they're sending guys to the NFL or the NBA. And just going up to somebody and just saying, like, "Hey, you don't know me, but I know you, and I could work for you," has been an effective mode for me. An effective I don't know, like, strategy, I guess.
Well, I tell you what, it struck me even back then when we worked together at Westwood One that you were a little wise beyond your years when it came to knowing how to do those things and kind of being in the right spots. One of those things that kind of led for you at Westwood One was covering Olympics. You went to 3 Olympic Games as, I believe, an intern or production at first, and then actually one of them you worked doing on air stuff there. Kind of tell me about how that came about and some of your best memories from those 3 Olympiad.
Yeah, so sorry, just a small, I only did 2.
Okay.
I never ended up going to the 3rd one because I got hired at WFAN.
Okay.
But, these were the biggest things of my career, getting to be behind the scenes and be a producer, production assistant. I wouldn't even say I was a producer. I was a production assistant. I was the lowest person on the totem pole. They called me, I was going into my senior year of college, and the Olympics were in Athens, Greece. And they called and they said, "Maggie, how old are you?" I said, "I'm 21. Why?" And because I'd been their intern for so long, I don't think they ever asked. And they said, "Well, we want to take you to Greece to be a production assistant. Call your mom and ask her if you can go, and then call us back." So I remember hanging up the phone, counting to like 90, and calling back and being like, "She said yes," because there was no way I wasn't going to go, and my parents were thrilled that I was going. And those experiences were amazing. You know, people kind of get down a little bit on the Olympics. I think it can be easy to get cynical about them. When you're there, you're drinking the Kool-Aid. It is so good. It's so different. And it was the first time I had ever done like an extended kind of project. Like we were there for a month. Um, and I learned so much. I mean, just not just about interpersonal, like how to work with a lot of different people who are all flown in for like this one thing, but working, you know, extremely weird hours, having to be really up to speed on all these Olympic sports that like I didn't, you know, I didn't really know the ins and outs of, but having to get up this to speed on a lot of them and just working really hard. And I had such good like role models for that because the people at Westwood, they never stop working. And it's such a, you know, when you look at people who you want to be where they are, right? Whether it's broadcasting, whether it's management, and you see how hard they work. And it's like, all right, that's the bar. Like that's the minimum. And I actually know I'm going to have to work harder if I really want this. You know, like someone else from Westwood who just left is Howie Deneroff, who is like a legend in radio and deserves to be in the Hall of Fame in Canton for everything he's done for football and the radio. And I was his intern once one summer in New York City, and he was like sleeping on the couch in his office getting ready for the NFL season in like July. And I'm like, this is how hard you have to work. This is what it takes. And I'm so thankful for that. And the Olympics was a big part of that, seeing how hard people were working and they weren't mailing it in, not one day. And I've taken that with me. I've tried to take that with me everywhere I've gone. That's the biggest thing I've taken from those Olympics.
Maggie, one more from those days at Westwood One. I believe you were the only woman basically in that entire thing in DC, possibly in New York as well. What was that like? And did that kind of teach you some lessons that you took forward in your career?
Um, you know, you're kind of aware of it. But I've really tried to, especially now in doing sports talk radio, instead of shying away from the differences, I've tried to like lean into it a little more. Like I am bringing a different point of view. And I can't help that. It's just the experiences that I've had and how I'm looking at the world. So I've tried to see it less as a, oh, I'm so much different as everyone else. This is a bad thing, or this could be an obstacle, or I have to like, overcome it, as opposed to this is something I provide that no one else in this office can, just by virtue of who I am and what I've done and what I've seen. So for that, I think that it's a way sometimes that I can stand out a little bit. I don't like to rely on that. Obviously, you got to do the work. You can't just be like, "Hey, I'm a woman and here I am to show up." But I think I for many many years I looked at it, I think, as something that I'd overcome or set me back, or something I've learned now that it actually can be a good thing. And I've tried to do that, like I'm a mom, I'm a lot of things. And for sports talk radio, when I'm being paid to give my opinion and paid to, show people and let people in a little bit more on your life, I think being a woman has actually helped kind of set me apart.
Maggie, when you, I believe we're done with GW and done with kind of that thing, you moved over, you got a job, I believe, with NBA TV as a production assistant, also did some covering the Nationals for the AP. How much do you think your producer background helped you when you became a host? Maybe having a finger on what works and what doesn't. We see so much now that folks kind of come straight off the field and may start doing radio. Obviously, a different perspective from you, but you, I believe, may have kind of acquired some of the overall 10,000-foot picture. Am I right on that?
I would recommend it for everybody, to definitely be listen, everyone's got their own path, but it really did help me to start on the production side because I learned what it means to tell a story and how and what are the beats of that and how do you get that across to the audience. I also learned, some technical editing skills, which definitely came in handy as well. And I also learned that things don't happen with the snap of a finger. You know, I think sometimes there are some hosts who they expect their producers to be like wizards or something. Like if I'm thinking it, it will just automatically appear. And how could this take so long and what that goes into it? And I'm so glad I had the production background so that I can give some grace to the producers who I'm working with. I realize that this is not easy. I realize I'm asking you to do something that's going to take your attention away from something else. I have a realistic expectation of how long things take. And I think that's a good thing to have, because you are relying in a lot of ways on your producers. I'm not saying they're like writing your copy for you, or they're not like, they can't do the job for you, but they can make you look good or bad. I mean, they can definitely enhance a broadcast no matter what, and especially for TV, because you have to be so much more conscious of how you're following the pictures, and the pictures can lead. So I'm so glad that I had that production background. It was invaluable. And working at the NBA, NBA Entertainment, I always say I would have stayed there the rest of my life. I love basketball. And I I could have seen a path for myself where I just would be lucky enough to work at the NBA in production for 20 years or something. But I really wanted to be on camera, and I realized they were never going to be like, "Hey, we need a host. You in the back who's literally never done this before. Get up here and start doing highlights with Isaiah Thomas." Like, that's not going to happen. So I got to go get some experience and try to be on camera.
Maggie, you did some updates eventually at WFAN, and also you got that work you talked about at MSG where you did sidelines. We did some play-by-play as well. I wanted to ask you this before we kind of get too far along in the interview. Because of your status now, have you thought about trying to get back into the booth as a play-by-play person? Because there are so many things now, and obviously there are so many women's sports on TV where they're looking for competent folks that have done it before, would obviously have a step up. Is that something you're still interested in doing? And has life kind of pushed that to the back burner a little bit?
You know, I would love to get back into play by play. It's such a different part of your brain. Like the people who do play by play and are great at it, they're so smart. I mean, you have to be so, it's just a different kind of thing than what I've been doing. And I would love to get back into it. Not saying I'm smart, but I would love to get back into it. I just can't really do the travel right now with my son is 5 years old. And it would, right now, I can't travel as much as I would like to because I want to be here for him. But once he gets older, if those opportunities would, by the grace of God, be there, I would love to do it because play by play is the thrill of that, not knowing what's going to happen, you know, every possible outcome. The sports talk radio is great too. It's just a lot more controlled. The play by play is just that is a, if you're an adrenaline junkie, play by play is for you because you have no idea where things are going.
No, we know that from doing a few of my Georgetown games, how much these things can turn around. Maggie, your really big break came from the job when you became the host of SI Now. And I didn't know this. I was doing research before. You did over 1,000 episodes of that show. You're there for a long time. It raised your profile, but did that kind of give you freedom to kind of figure out what worked and what didn't on a national stage?
Absolutely. We were kind of early to the space. Doing like a digital variety show, so to speak, was not really happening. I always say to Adam Lefko, it was like me and Lefko when he was at Bleacher Report. We were the ones who were kind of doing that. And now, it's way more like ubiquitous. And it was fantastic because it was the perfect combination of having a space where you could try out all different things. I love that picture. But also having the gravitas of being at Sports Illustrated. So we got to interview everybody. I mean, you work for SI, especially, then things have changed a little bit now, but they've gotten back on their feet, which is awesome. People are calling you back. You're going to get your phone call returned. People are going to want to be a part of this. So this is all the swimsuit models who are there, who I was interviewing once, a couple of times. Perfect marriage. Like I got to interview everybody. It felt like I got to go all over the country, different college football towns, NFL, covering, Super Bowls. I was there for 8 years. I did 8 Super Bowls. Everything about that job was just the perfect thing for me at that time. And It taught me, that if I want the big job, this is like how this is the water you got to be swimming in, right? Like these are the connections you have to make. These are the people you got to want to be interviewing, breaking news with your interviews, getting aggregated to make sure that news gets out there, and just sort of developing relationships with people. And it felt so big time to me to be at SI because of what SI means, the fact they put their faith in me. Um, Crazy story how I got that job. It was like an open casting call. I didn't know anyone there. And I was like in this room with all these other broadcasters who I like know now, who are like friends. And they had us like read something. And I don't remember now, like an update. And I said, forgive me. I'm like, we got into a conversation with the person behind the camera. I said, yeah, I'm working Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Eve at WFAN doing overnight updates, midnight to 6 a.m.
Mhm.
They go, you're working Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Eve doing midnight to 6 a.m. updates. I go, yeah, it's going to be great. And the woman turned the camera back on and was like, tell the camera what you just told me. And I said it. And I think that really helped me get a call back because they realized that I was not going to ever shy away from a challenge. You never get into sports for the hours or the pay. And I think I think that's something that helped separate me was I was willing to work the worst days in the worst possible hours. And I was doing it with a smile on my face. And I think that helped.
Well, I will say this though. I don't know if you remember this, but Westwood One, they used to cater on Thanksgiving and Christmas. You never lived if you haven't had chocolate cake on the set of Face the Nation, which
That's awesome.
Dave Preston and I did one time. It was amazing. We loved it.
Dave
Anyway,
Preston is awesome.
Maggie, having a handle on social media, I feel like is a thing that you have been very good at in your career.
Mm.
Where did you kind of learn that, and did you get any good advice about that along the way?
I got the best advice from Peter King, who said, don't check your mentions. And that has been the best possible advice. I wish I could tell you I adhere to it every single time, but my willpower will run out, and sometimes I'll check the mentions and I'll see what people are calling me horrible names and all of that stuff, and then I'll go, okay, I shouldn't have done that. When I got the job at WFAN, Peter was like, you've got to really thicken up your skin. And reading what everyone says on social media is going to do the opposite of that. It's going to make you it's going to make you like discouraged, and you're going to feel resentful and like all these things. And he was right. And that was the best possible advice I could have gotten. As far as like the other stuff, I think you just have to do like a variety. I actually wish I was much better at social media. It's one of those things, it never sleeps, right? So you always feel like you're not doing enough. You always feel like you're playing catch up. Like there's nothing that could ever satisfy unless you have a team behind you, which I
Mhm.
don't. It's just me. Um, I feel like you always feel like you're behind the eight ball. You always feel like you need to be doing more and more and more. So thank you for saying that. But I I feel like I'm like 20 tweets a day shy of my goal.
So there is a quote that I saw from you talking about when you were interviewing Stephanie McMahon, and she had talked about targeting certain areas and getting to people where they are. I guess
Yeah.
that's kind of a little more what I was referring to. Can you tell me about that advice you got from Stephanie?
Oh, she was great. And WWE does such a good job of packaging all of their content, and everything makes sense for the platform it's on. So Twitter's going to have different stuff than Facebook. Facebook will have different stuff than YouTube. YouTube will have they are masters at that. And she spoke about it like it's not a one size fits all. What works for Instagram is not going to work for YouTube, and you cannot be neglecting any of those. Stephanie's brilliant. I don't know how much credit anyone gets at WWE because Vince McMahon was such a big figure before his issues, and Triple H obviously, but Stephanie, I mean, dedicated her life to that business, and she's worked in every part of it. She really has a handle on what's going on. She was like, in no way was she just like a figurehead at that company, from what I could tell.
Maggie, when you were kind of coming along your way. I remember hearing you. I'd be heading in to do my updates at Sirius XM and catching you doing the morning weekends with Mark Malusis Moose. And obviously, you knew sports, you could communicate, but how important was it to do that with a partner after all the time at SI now, where you could kind of get that style down pat on a national level?
Yeah, it was great, and it taught me so much because especially when you're doing radio with a partner, the best radio, well, I guess it's probably subjective, but, if you agree all the time, that doesn't really make for amazing radio, in my opinion. Now, I don't think everyone has to be Mike and the Mad Dog where you're screaming at each other for 5 hours a day. That can get a little much, but you have to be I think it's good when people bring 2 different points of view. Um, and so with Moose, what was great about that is we kind of fundamentally just see sports in a different way. And so we would naturally sort of disagree with each other. And it made me realize that if I'm going to come with an opinion, I've got to back it up. I'm not going to overstat you to death, but I've got to have a couple things like, I've got to have some ammo, so to speak, for my argument. I can't just get on the air and say, I think, that the Panthers should trade Bryce Young and then have nothing to back it up. I've got to be able to make an opinion or who should be starting for the Yankees, game 1 of the ALCS or whatever it is. And doing the show with Moose really taught me that you can't just come in and not prepare. Like it's got to be prepped. You've got to figure out how you're going to make your argument like entertaining. And the way that the perfect thing for sports talk radio, the absolute perfect topic, argument, take, whatever you want to call it, is when 50% of people agree with you and 50% of people disagree. That's as good as it gets, is to split them right down the middle. Half are with you, half are against you. Like that's the goal and always the goal. And so it'd be great where we would set up these, like, not that it was fake, but like when he would say something, then I would say something, and then let's see how the callers, let's see what people say. Who's with me? Who's with you? And we'd kind of go back and forth, and that was really helpful.
Maggie, obviously you kind of move forward in your career and you get that big break. WFAN, we referenced it before. Chris Carlin, Bart Scott, you guys replaced Mike Francesa. Now, obviously, knowing you don't back down from challenges. It's been your entire life. It's kind of kicking in doors and barriers and things. Was that mountain even bigger than you expected when you got the job?
100%. It was also funny enough, like this was one of the only times in my life, and it's ironic that it ended up being my biggest break. It was a job I was not looking for.
Mm-hmm.
It was a job that I didn't think I was in the running for. It was a job I never thought I would get in a million years. And so when I all of a sudden got an email from Mark Chernoff, can you meet today? Like, can you meet for lunch today? I was like, that's kind of interesting. Like, I know Mark, I've worked for him before as a fill-in, but I've never got an urgent email from him ever. And I went and met with him and Chris Olivero, and they said, do you want this job? And my jaw was on the floor. And it ended up being one of the great experiences. I mean, you see there the photo of me and Carlin and Bart. I listen, did it turn out exactly how I thought it was going to go? No, I didn't anticipate that Mike was going to come back only a few months later. But, the good things that I take from that job were the exposure that I got, the experience that I got, and then getting to have great friends like Bart and Carlin. And we're still great friends. You go through something like that together, and it bonds you. And they've been 2 of my like biggest supporters. I'm of theirs as well. And it's sad a little that we don't get to work together every day anymore, but everyone's like thriving and I love to see it. Carlin's got his midday show. Bart's got his midday show and still doing Jets. Carlin's doing play-by-play, doing NFL games on ESPN radio and Rutgers. Like everyone's just got their thing going on and we're still close. So of all the things that came out of that, me getting 2 friends for life is definitely the best part.
Maggie, before we get into your current gig, and there's so much to talk about there, got to ask you this one. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on it, but obviously, one thing folks know you for the whole James Dolan saga. Folks, if you
Yeah.
want the whole details, Maggie answered on the Awful Announcing podcast. Go to that, get the
Yeah.
details there, because that was a very good interview done there.
Thanks.
Obviously, you critiqued him. You wrote a song about he should have known about the Harvey Weinstein situation, despite having all those things in his own organization. And a lot of folks said your criticism was very fair. But as one thing you kind of talked about, you called him the quote vile piece of trash, and he ends up banning the entire company from his venues and all that.
Yep.
What lessons did you learn and take from that whole ordeal?
I mean, I think the biggest thing I learned and the biggest regret I have is like calling him a vile piece of trash was probably a little too much. And I was kind of like just sort of going, and it really did make me upset. I don't think, and again, this kind of goes back to maybe I have a bit of a different perspective because I'm a woman, you know, hearing him do this song saying I would have thrown myself on the railroad tracks had I known anything about Harvey Weinstein. It's like, wait a minute, you just had to pay a 11, 9-figure settlement for sexual harassment that happened in your own building. And it kind of brought something out in me that was real. And I think just ended up obviously crossing a line because of the language that I used. Now I've heard other men use language that seems pretty personal, maybe not towards him, but towards other powerful people. And it doesn't seem like they have gotten the same kind of consequences that I've gotten, especially considering I did offer an apology for the language that I use on the air and off the air. Um, but I think I would learn that, you just got to really, really be in control of everything you're saying at all times. And it's a live medium. And I feel like my gut is pretty good and my gut instincts are good. And I think it's what's gotten me as far as I have. But in that instance, I don't think my gut was right on. I think I should have toned it down. And I just feel bad that other people had to feel the shrapnel from that. I never want to make it hard for someone else to do their job, and the fact that, I think James Dolan is a particular kind of person who has probably played this out much, much longer than it needs to be played out. That's my opinion. But I felt bad that other people had to sort of, had to be affected by it when really unfortunately what was lost was again the song that he wrote.
Yeah.
And why I was saying it in the first place. And the story became more about the words I used and not the message that I was sending. And it became more about, him banning people from Madison Square Garden and not about the song and not about his past. And for that, I do regret that a lot.
Maggie, as you have your entire career, you find a way to move forward and upward. And now I think you're in a really good spot with Andrew Perloff. How did you guys get put together?
So McLovin from the Dan Patrick Show for 12 years, Perloff, we worked together at Sports Illustrated. So he was one of Peter King's Monday Morning Quarterback producers. Perloff worked at SI for a long time. He's written a lot of great pieces for Sports Illustrated in the past and SI.com too. And we've just been friends for a long time. And so when I was moving over to the network side, which is something I really wanted, and the people at Odyssey who own WFAN and also Infinity, they were really cool to accommodate me there and to work with me, because I sort of WFAN had kind of run its course for me. Things had changed so much since I originally got hired there. I thought it was time to go back to my national roots. And I just called Perloff one day and I said, "Hey, what's going on over at DP?" Because Dan Patrick had announced that he was going to be retiring soon, and he was like, "Let's do this. Let's take a leap together." And that was 3 years ago. And we started in the afternoons. Then we got moved to the morning show, which has been great, and we're having a fun time. Like it's much different than any other radio experience because WFAN is a different type of sound. The New York sound and the New York expectation on radio is a certain thing. And I like that national, there's no expectation about what it's supposed to sound like. You can really start from scratch and a blank canvas and kind of go from there. At WFAN, people are extremely creative there. I'm not saying that, but there will always be a bit of a formula, which is you're talking about the Jets, Mets, the Yankees, and the Giants for the most part, Knicks now a little bit. more, and then you're taking calls. And again, people do it an amazing job there. It's not a put down of what they're doing. It's just this is a little more open and free about what we want to talk about.
Maggie, with this show, I think you had been seen where you kind of said that it was a good transition for you guys doing going from afternoons to mornings, because you kind of were already doing a bit of a morning show where there was a lot of the, having fun. There was a lot of the kind of doing kind of bits, and with obviously you and Perloff like to have fun. Is that kind of the way it worked for you guys, where it was that easy transition because you're already kind of doing a morning show in the afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it probably made it a little easier on the executives once Damon Amendolara, who is fantastic and left to go to Sirius, was like, all right, who are we gonna get for our morning show? They look at us in the afternoon and we're like putting our faces in bowls of chili and eating jars of jelly and peanut butter and just like paying off bets in stupid ways and silly ways and like destroying things in our studio for charity. And like we already kind of hit a lot of the beats of what a morning show air quote
Mhm.
would be. Because I've always like tried to take my work really seriously, but not take myself seriously. And I think that has helped me, especially in sports broadcasting, but just overall. Um, we're entertaining people. And one thing I learned actually from WFAN, because Sports Illustrated was like a lot of journalism with a capital J, which is
Mhm.
great. And it didn't mean we didn't have fun there. But it was very it's like serious journalism. There's an expectation of what you get from SI. And WFAN is like show business. It feels a little like show business because it's just a little bit more performative and a little bit more people have very strong opinions about you, and it's covered almost like a pro team in New York. So there's just a little more of a showbiz element to it. And that taught me a lot. We're here to entertain. And sometimes we have to be serious, like the Dolan thing. And sometimes you get into topics that have to be serious, but we should be a place where you feel like you can have some fun. And that doesn't come across unless the hosts themselves are actually having a good time. And so, again, I try to trust my gut of where the line is, but we go right up to it.
I think you referenced this before, but local versus national, what do you like better?
I like national because we can really decide what we want to talk about. I mean, there are certain markets that are a little bit bigger than others that we want to make sure we hit. But for the most part, it's like, what do we want to talk about? If you're doing local, there are things you have to talk about. And because the audience is expecting you to talk about it. And I actually didn't mind the minutia of the local, which is you can never be too minutia. You can talk about the Mets bullpen for weeks, months, the whole year. You can talk about the Yankees starting rotation for weeks, months, the whole year. It will always be relevant. Um, and that stuff is actually fun when you get into it because the audience is like living and dying with it also. But it is also kind of refreshing. Like right now, we can talk about Derek Carr having this great, beginning of the season with the Saints. I would have never talked about something like that on WFAN. New Orleans might as well be Mars if you are doing New York. And so for that, it's kind of great to talk about college football again is great, which is something that really didn't happen much on WFAN. So I like the fact that we can kind of pick more topics.
You kind of referenced it, some of the bits you do, and actually, I'm just kind of asking you this to bring up the pictures. But you guys get kind of crazy. What's the most fun thing you guys have done so far on Perloff, Maggie and Perloff?
Well, WrestleMania, that one was fun. Me and my producer EJ lost that bet, which is why we're wearing the matching tag team wrestling stuff. But going to WrestleMania was great. They let us go down to the ring and we got to take some photos and videos there to sort of pay off this bet, which was dumb. Stupid bet that we lost. Um, I thought watching Perloff eat an entire jar of peanut butter in 30 minutes and not only eating it, but then like going for the second jar, I thought was very fun. And that was a big YouTube day for us. And then we did another thing where sort of like making a little like repurposing something. And my former boss, Spike Eskin, who's now does afternoon drive in Philadelphia, was our program director, is so good at these kinds of things, building it up, like the peanut butter thing. It doesn't sound like a lot, but we did this whole bit about HRs getting involved and, like none of that was true. Like we just sort of set it up.
Theater of the mind.
Yeah, or just like, and we had Spike come in. He's like, "You can't do this, and this is forbidden." And people are like wrote a think piece about how make radio fun again. And we're just sort of building up this thing. And so he was great about that. And I lost a bet to a caller, one of our like regular kind of callers, about Oregon football. And I had to wear a duck suit. So I bought the duck suit and I'm wearing the duck suit and I got to pay it off again, take my job seriously, but not myself. So then I just got a duck suit sitting around. I'm like, all right, what else can we do with the duck suit that's sitting here? So we talked to my boss about it. He's like, why don't you have people ask like questions to the duck? So it became the advice duck. And like, I'm just wearing a suit, a duck suit, answering questions about sports and other things about people. It was so silly. I took it to the Super Bowl. Can you believe this? I wore the duck suit and I'm seeing like Solomon Wilcots. I'm like, you're like a professional, serious person. And I'm wearing a duck suit. Yeah, it was silly. And just doing stuff like that. And one thing that Jim Rome, I think, does so well, Howard Stern obviously like does this, and Jim, they're masters, is creating a language of the show and a shorthand. So the people, Lebitard's great at this too. Like people who you have like, oh, the advice duck, and you have bits and you have things. And so people, you almost reward your listeners because they're in on the joke. And creating a language of the show, I think, is so important. And so little things like that, we can pull back reference points without leaving your new audience behind, obviously, is like what everyone aspires to do, I think.
Well, Maggie, we can only hope that when next time Rutgers plays Oregon, you can have a picture with Carlin in the duck suit. Last one for you. You mentioned it before. You got a 5-year-old, and I believe, you're kind of working that out when it comes to, I believe it kind of changed. You could still do pickups. It was just, or drop-offs, one of the two. How have you been able to, how has it basically changed this job for you as a working mom?
Yeah, I mean, always basically feeling guilty because you're not there for your kid is one part, but I think a lot of moms feel that. I being a mom is something I always knew I wanted to do. And I'm so lucky that I, have my son, and he's amazing. My husband is phenomenal. And I think it makes me way more relatable, like especially doing a morning show. We don't overdo our family stuff and always talking about our kids, but like every once in a while, the parenting stuff comes up. It's like, this is gold because it's so universal. And it doesn't matter if you're in Tallahassee or if you're in Eugene, this parenting stuff comes up. And so I think it's made me a lot more well-rounded. And then on the personal side, Jeremy, like, this, not every show is going to be awesome. You're going to feel like, oh man, I really wish that could have been better, and I used to carry that stuff with me and not be able to like turn the page and stew in it and think of it and just sort of beat myself up over and over and over. Like I had like a bad show, which I'm sure the audience didn't even feel the same way, but I did. And something about having a kid has helped with that perspective of he doesn't know, he doesn't care. And there's just something that's bigger than me, a job I have that's bigger than the job it's just been very good for my mental, on those days when you feel like, oh, I really could have been better. It's like, I can just turn the page on it a little easier when I've got to go pick my son up from pre-K.
Well, Maggie, so proud of everything you've done. And again, just so wonderful to watch your career ascend the way it has and only onward and upward. Thank you so much for taking so much time and joining us here on Huber and Friends.
Jeremy, thank you. Thank you for giving me that opportunity back then to do high school sports, and I hope I did a good job. I don't know. I hope I did.
So we're going to finish this off with one. I remember you messed up one name. It was Sharando High School. The reason that's okay is because they're the team that knocked us out of the regional final. My alma mater, when I played, they knocked us out. Kelly Washington was their best player. If you poll anybody I played with, they can all tell you how much they dislike Kelly Washington and Sharando. So if you're going to mess one up, Maggie, that was the one to do it.
By the grace of the football gods, that was the one that I messed up. Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. I remember it so crystal clear. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie.